Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our NorthStar Community Sunday service. We're so glad to have you joining us, either in person or online. And today we're going to continue to talk about that wonderful subject called toxic shame. Such a favorite subject, right? So before we get too far into this, I think just to talk about NorthStar Community real fast, we meet on Wednesdays and Fridays at 6:30, and then, of course, on Sundays at 11:15 or 9:30 if you want to come to Sunday school, or small group, probably a better way of saying that. But I think that toxic shame is such a symbolic subject for NorthStar because we're so about supporting and understanding God's grace and Jesus' love for us. And when we have toxic shame, that's really hard to understand. And it's hard to see sometimes if you don't have some feedback with it. And that's why, come to small groups like ours are so important for us to really understand, again, how our destructive internal thinking creates so much addictive issues in our lives. And so, one of the subjects or one of the definitions we use for addiction is habitual behavior to avoid pain. And I think that it's such a great definition because it tells us that addiction is built around trauma, around abandonment, and which all lead to shame. Because you always have to remember, I say this over and over again, but it's important for us to hear this, is that as adults, we do not remember what we were like as kids. We think we do, but we don't. We don't remember the awkward feelings we had when we first started maturing physically. We don't remember the slights we felt or the pain we felt when we were 5 and 6 years old. We don't remember those things. We don't. Like I always say, if you want to really think about it, one of the things I almost guarantee you don't think about and remember is how small you were. So when I was 5 years old, what was I, this tall? Well, the adults were way tall, right? So that by itself changes dynamics. And particularly when you're in abusive environments where you're being abused on an ongoing basis, then you develop so much shame. And what we forget, this is a part that's so important to remember. As a child, when my parents, if they're being destructive and abusive to me, I don't sit there and think about their deep psychological issues they're having. What I do is I blame myself for it. I blame myself for the way they're behaving, because if I was a better kid, maybe mom wouldn't be drinking so much. Or if I was a better child, maybe dad wouldn't get so explosive and throw the table across the room. Those are all things, and that's what we forget. So then what happens is we carry that with us into our adulthood. And so what I just can't emphasize this enough to you, that if we could get rid of our toxic shame, so much of our destructive behaviors we do with hurts, habits, and hang-ups would maybe not go away, but they at least would be less. And so again, and when we talk about addiction, we have a pretty broad definition of addiction, and so the way I like to break it down is substances, which is one we all think of, like alcohol, heroin. I don't know whether eating, which one that fits into, if it's substances or if it's compulsive behaviors. But then we have substances, and then we have compulsive behaviors, and those are things that are destructive in our lives we just can't stop doing, no matter how much we try. I'm not going to do it again. I'm not going to do it again, and boom, I did it again. Right? It's true, like Paul writes in Romans 7 about, I try to do good, I say I'm going to do good, and I don't do good. Right? Because it's just, there's something about the compulsive behavior that drives me to, at least for a moment, avoid my pain. That's what it's all about. And then, of course, the other one, and probably the biggest of all, though we don't really see it this way, is our addiction to people. When we either put upon other people the responsibility to make me happy, or I put upon myself the responsibility to make someone else happy, I am now in codependent land, which means I'm addicted to people. And so think about toxic shame, how that drives all this. So toxic shame, again, is this belief system that I'm bad. I'm a bad person. I'm flawed. I'm not smart enough. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not educated enough. I can go on with the list that we create about ourselves. And what we do, I kind of my definition of toxic shame is a self-perpetuated brutal tyranny in our life, because it is so destructive. And I promise you that you look upon other people, you don't impose those on them. You think they're all fine, or at least a lot of them you see is doing well, when the fact is they're probably walking around with toxic shame about themselves. So I'm going to read Romans 8 real fast here. Now, again, this is the Message Bible, so Eugene Peterson, tries to put it into everyday language. And this is right after Paul has written about Romans 7, about his inability to do good, right? He talks about how he's helpless and powerless. So this is Romans 8:1 is what I'm going to read to you. With the arrival of Jesus, the Messiah, that fateful dilemma is resolved. Those who enter into Christ being here for us no longer have to live under a continuous, low-lying black cloud. A new power is in operation. The Spirit of life in Christ, like a strong wind, has magnificently cleared the air, freeing you from a fated lifetime of brutal tyranny at the hands of sin and death. So the reason why I was attracted to this was because the underlying black cloud, we all understand, I see that's such a great definition of toxic shame. Because what I see toxic shame as, if I had a visual of it, I see it as that insidious cloud that comes in, and when we breathe it in, we immediately declare war on us. And it isn't good, the stuff we think. And in talking about Jesus freeing us from a fated lifetime of brutal tyranny at the hands of our own self-perceptions, our toxic shame of ourself is a way I like to look at that. So I can say to you, and it's true, that if you really, really, really accepted Christ and understood his love for us, our toxic shame could go away. But unfortunately, our toxic shame likes to hang around. And not only does our toxic shame like to hang around, it keeps us from connecting with God. It keeps us from connecting with other people because of how we see ourselves. I wish that there was, I just wish there was ways we could understand God's grace, Jesus' love for us. It's just, I guess the problem is it's just too good to be true. And so what I like to say to us at NorthStar a lot of times is, I don't see us in NorthStar materialistic. I mean, we're not in there, bragging about my house is bigger than your house, or my car's better than your car, or I'm wearing better. That stuff never even enters our minds at NorthStar. But you know what I do think our addiction is? I think we're addicted to toxic shame at times. It makes us feel complete. It makes us feel whole. I mean, how many of you out there, again, you're online or sitting here, I assume you're here because of your struggles with recovery, struggles with addiction, all those things. If we could just do that, just boom, take away your toxic shame, we would be uncomfortable because we wouldn't really know what to do with that. That's why it's so important that we do this in a process. But the fact is, we need to let go of our toxic shame, and we can. And we need to replace it with weird things like gratitude, right? Like being thankful and having healthy people in our lives. All these things that toxic shame keeps us from doing. So my assumption is, if I'm addicted, if I cannot stop whatever it is, if it's a hurt, if it's a habit, or if it's a hang-up, if it's a substance, if it's compulsive behavior, if it's codependency, and of course we all know, for us that are veterans in recovery, there's a pretty good chance we're doing all of them anyway. It isn't just the substances. We're also probably doing some compulsive behaviors, and we're probably also doing some pretty bad relationships all at the same time. Is usually how we do this, right? So my assumption is that we really have grown to loathe ourselves. We just really don't like ourselves very much. And if we do start liking ourselves, that little voice kicks in and tells us, you're not worth it. You better not get well because you're going to mess it up if you do, right? That's what toxic shame does to us. And again, I'm really big on looking at our childhood and see how it affects us today, not as an excuse, so don't even hear me coming close to that one. You're an adult now. It's your responsibility to recover. But you know what? If you just erase all that childhood stuff like it never happened, you're not going to get well because you're carrying too much baggage. So again, you hear me talk about the adverse childhood experiences. I use that all the time as such a symbolic measure for us. So the adverse childhood experiences survey is 10 questions. You can go online and find it. It's easy to find. And it asks us basically questions about physical abuse. It asks us about violence in your home. It asks you about disruption in your home. So one of the examples is, I think number 9, it's 9 or 10, I can't remember which one it is, asks you, did anyone in your immediate family go to jail or prison? Well, the theory is on that question is, if someone in your house went to jail, there's probably a lot of chaos in your house, right? You don't just have this, everything was great, and then someone went to jail. No, that's usually not how it goes. Usually it was a whole bunch of stuff went on, and finally they went to jail, right? So these questions are just so illuminating about the chaos that you grew up as a child. So again, the statistic I use all the time, you can look at it, it's out there, is that about 28% of the population scored 0 on the ACE, which again, we all joke about NorthStar, like, yeah, and they're all in denial. So, but there are people out there that did not face trauma and abandonment. They are. But if you score 6 or more on the ACE without working on it, without recovery, you will die on average 20 years younger than someone who scores 0 on the ACE. I don't know what else to tell you to get you to see how important our childhoods are. So my quote again, I will use this over and over and over. A professor of mine said this to me. It's so true. I really don't care about your childhood. I just care about how your childhood's affecting you today. That's what we have to deal with. And that's what toxic shame is about, overcoming the toxic shame of our childhood so that we can become this person that we were meant to be. For a lot of us in recovery, we come from such chaos and craziness, we don't even know what healthy looks like, let alone do it. That's why you need to come to groups that you can feel safe in. And NorthStar is one of those places. We don't sell you anything. We don't make you buy anything. You come. You talk if you want. If you don't, it's okay. We give you feedback, but it's out of love. And we're all there at some level in recovery. Some of us have been in recovery 20-plus years. Some of us have been 20 days. It doesn't matter. But you got to come and connect. It's the only way you're going to get there. And for a lot of us, connection it means nothing but pain and misery in our childhood. All connection was one betrayal after another. And so make sure you hear me on this. Make sure you hear me on this. For some of you, you may score low on the ACE because you weren't in a traumatic, abusive, getting beat up every day by your parents kind of thing. But there's a whole bunch out there that experience abandonment. And abandonment is just as deadly. It's just not as obvious, right? The analogy I use is I've had a lot of people come to my office, women who have said they endured an emotionally abusive marriage for 15 years before they finally could leave. And you know what a lot of them have said to me? I wish they would have just punched me in the face. I could have left then, but I just couldn't without. It was emotional. It broke me down, but I didn't see it as abusive as it was till I got away from it. If they would have just punched me in the face, it would have been so much easier. So you understand how abandonment is deadly too. Abandonment takes away your whole self-concept too. So trauma and abandonment, make sure you hear me say those in the same categories. Think about some of you out there that were bullied. That's such a one to look at. What bullying does to people is so devastating. right? And it goes on, and we, no matter how much we think that we're responding, that we aren't really. Whatever it is, whatever causes us to loathe ourselves, to despise ourselves, we need to do something about that. And so the point is that our goal is to have a rich, full, meaningful life. You will never have a rich, full, meaningful life if you are haunted by the ghosts of your past to where you can't connect. So shame is a good thing. I need shame. It gives me limits. It tells me when I've done something wrong, when I feel bad, I've harmed somebody or whatever. That's what shame's for. So we won't do it again. Or, well, in many of our cases, we won't do it 400 times. Maybe we'll only do it 300 times, right? But the fact is, shame is there to help us do what we're supposed to do. We want to avoid the bad feeling of shame. I don't know about you, but when shame hits me or guilt, some people you can even use the word guilt on this, it ruins my day. I don't like it. I need to do something about it. That's okay. That's the kind of shame we need. But what we don't need is when we internalize the shame, and what we impose upon ourselves is a sense of deep-seated inadequacy, where we see ourselves as nothing but a broken, flawed, unlovable individual. And you know, it's sad how many of us suffer from this. So, real fast, we'll talk about physiology just for a second. So, actually, I'm going to do it twice. The first one is about some of the emotions that we have that is physiological. It's a chemistry. So, one is cortisol. So, when I grow up in an abusive environment, or I'm living in an abusive environment, like we'll use a combat soldier, for instance. When he's in combat, his cortisol levels are very high because he's in survival, right? But then the problem is for a lot of our soldiers is they come home and their cortisol levels are still very high. And so it's hard for them to return back to civilian life. And that's what they have to work on with their PTSD. But think about us that as children were abused on an ongoing basis. And so what they have found is one of the biggest destructions for us as children that we experienced was what we call immobilized. We were unable to get away from ongoing abuse. So think about it. Children from 4 years old, or well before that, when you start remembering things. So a child from 0 to 18 is in an environment that's abusive, and you can't get away from it. Do you think that might affect us? And affect how we see ourselves and how we impose upon ourselves all this terrible kind of thinking about ourselves. So what happens then is, as Dr. Vanderkolk talks in his book, The Body Keeps the Score, which I do highly recommend to everybody, is that our emotional floodgates are wide open. We haven't shut them back down. And so we're walking around in survival brain, suspicious of everybody, expecting bad things to happen, suspicious of ourselves, have no confidence in ourselves. So yeah, we're waiting for the other shoe to fall all the time. And so one of the addictive thinking subjects we talk about all the time is morbid thinking. For us, it's hard to get rid of morbid thinking. We assume something bad is going to happen, and if it doesn't, we probably need to do something about that and make something bad happen, right? We can be our own worst enemies. So we're walking around at DEFCON 3 when the fact is we're really not at DEFCON 3. We're not in danger. There's no reason for us to have some of the anxiety we have and the depression. And in Dopamine Nation by Anna Lemke, it's another good book. She talks about how since 1990 in Western countries, depression has increased by 50% since 1990. Think about that. 50% higher depression rates. And what she says is what's happening is that our epinephrine and norepinephrine, which is another important chemical we have in our bodies, is because of all the dopamine that we're putting into our bodies with our hurts, habits, and hang-ups, but with our screen time, gaming time, our lack of connecting to people, because now we're much more isolated. What it does is our body is always constantly trying to pull us back down because of our high dopamine levels we're exposed to. So what happens is if we have too low of epinephrine and norepinephrine, we have low energy, high anxiety, high depression, and thus toxic shame. Oh, happy day, correct? So we have to figure this out. And so back what I was saying earlier, when I talk about, I don't see us materialistic at NorthStar. What I see us as is we can be addicted maybe to pain. Emotional pain we might be a little addicted to. Because you know what it does? It gives us a sense of satisfaction in the long run. One of the things we talk about all the time is resentment. Resentment is one of the most wonderful drugs out there. We love resentment. We can take it, I always kid about take it, take that injection of resentment, and then we can put ourselves out there and be mad at someone, and sometimes we don't even tell them about it. That makes more sense, doesn't it? So we live our life in quiet resentment, right? Because it gives us power. It's crazy. It's destructive, but it gives us power, right? And so the greatest definition of resentment is I drink the poison and expect the other person to die. Really helpful, huh? So we keep drinking that resentment that creates more dopamine in us. Guess what it does then? It keeps us more depressed, makes us more isolated. So you can see how all this goes. So when Jesus said, there's only two things you got to do. We get in all this theology. He really said two things. Love your neighbor. So love yourself enough to love your neighbors. And the other was get rid of everything in your life that's more important than me. So I challenge all of you, you need to think about this. What's more important, God's love or you're hanging on to your toxic shame? Because I think there's many times where we are kind of doing this again, right? And St. Augustine said, God's grace is free. All you got to do is come with both hands open, and we do this. I really want your grace and your love, but I also want to hang on to this stuff I like to beat myself up and feel terrible and see myself as, because that's what I understand. So the good news is, though, we are built to have adaptive responses to challenges in our environment, right? Think about it. For you that scored 6 or above on the ACE, and again, if I were to go around the NorthStar table, which I do every once in a while, I think about 70 to 75% of us have scored at least 6 or above, right? And I will tell you, they will tell you, the freeing experience is understanding the ACE, understand what it tells them about their lives, and then it makes sense. It reduces toxic shame because they can move on now. It makes sense. But here's the good news. When we're put into very difficult environments, it's amazing what we can do, right? And so one of the problems we're running into in our society now, again, Anna Lemke talking about her book, Dopamine Nation, I'm paraphrasing her wildly here, is basically we have become it's harder for us to have pleasure now because of how the dopamine levels are so high, while at the same time, we don't handle pain very well. So we've become less resilient to pain, and we need more something to make us happy. That's not a good combo, is it? So that's why I love recovery. Recovery is about, sorry, buddy, you got to face your pain. I wish you didn't, but you do. And if you don't have pain, you're not going to recover, even though you need it, or you're too blind to see the pain at this point. But we cannot recover without pain. But the beauty is that what we do is our bodies learn to adjust, and that's the problem. It's a double-edged sword. We learn to adjust to all the abuse and all the misery of our childhood or our adulthood, whatever it is. We learn to adapt to it and survive it. So then the problem is we go to toxic shame and addiction and all those things, right? But the other side of that is, and this is called brain plasticity, is that our brains have an amazing ability to recover. Our brains have an amazing ability to let go of that stuff, but it doesn't happen if you're not aware of it and if you're not doing something about it. If you don't do something about it, it's not going to work. And think of all you out there who have relapsed, which is everyone. Relapse is part of the deal. I wished in some ways you didn't have to do it. When I hear about someone relapsing, only thing I feel bad about is that I know that you now have heaped a whole bunch of toxic shame on yourself. But the fact is, we all relapse. We all relapse. The beauty is you get back up and you keep going. And if you're in a supportive, loving, grace-filled place, you can do that. We can recover. Our brains are made to adapt and respond and recover. That's the beauty of it. And so my little bullet here is awareness, 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 support, support, support. I don't know how to say it to you. Balance is the key. If we consume too much pain, or if pain is in too potent of a form, we run into the risk of compulsive, destructive overconsumption, right? So if I'm in so much pain, I can't face life. I'm gonna drink a lot. I'm gonna get on Facebook and punish myself even more, and I'll go out and find my 33rd broken relationship. That's what we do, right? So what we have to do is we have to figure out ways to gradually see a process here over time where we face our pain in ways we can handle, and also ways we can face our pain so we can stop letting go of some of the destruction in our lives and replace that with some other stuff. If we have a process that we believe in and we see a worthy goal at the end of it, which means I'm going to be clean, sober, and I might even have a glimpse of rich, full, meaningful life once in a while, that's worth doing. But if we don't think that's going to happen, it's not. And so with toxic shame, basically there's kind of three ways we do it, and you probably can combine these two. Is one way is we just loathe ourselves, we don't talk about it, we just continue to decay within ourselves. The second one is mediocrity. There is no way when I have toxic shame that I can accept that I can be good at anything. So I have to, at minimum, be mediocre. I remember years and years ago when I was living in another place, I had a student, a Taekwondo student, who was so good. This person they beat everybody they ever fought. It was not even close. But you know what stopped her? She had a shame-driven, abusive home. She could not accept being great. And that's what stopped her. I see that a lot with athletes. I see it within myself at times. I've sabotaged me doing something really well because of my toxic shame. And kind of then add to that is the third, and I think this is the most prevalent, is we just see ourselves as never enough. We're never enough. Everyone else is smarter than us. Everybody else does it better than us. Everybody does this. And when we do something right, it was an accident, right? So we we externalize anything good we do. We see it as an accident almost. And we internalize all the bad stuff. And we see what a low-life person we were. Do you see the point? And when something good happens, we go, oh, well, everybody could do that. Or, I don't know, I guess I was just lucky. No. The fact is you do have talent and skills and all that. So what we have to realize again with toxic shame is that we're not God. We're not perfect. We never will be. And we're not unlimited. We need shame. We need shame in our lives to keep us from doing dumb things. But we also need to love ourselves enough and believe in God enough to be okay when things go well. Because that's hard for us with toxic shame. And what happens is if we're not careful, if we have too much toxic shame, we either live our lives holding ourselves back and doing nothing because we don't believe in ourselves, or we're out here living off the rails, full speed ahead, living destructively, drinking too much and using too much and living recklessly and getting in fights and everything else that goes with it, and neither one of those work. So toxic shame either gives us too many limits or it doesn't give us limits at all. And neither one of those work well, just so you know. And think about examples of this in your life that you probably can think of yourself, but you have these dreams. You think maybe I could do that. And then your toxic shame kicks in and goes, no, you can't do that. You're mediocre at best. You're below average. You don't deserve this. Or I'm out there going, I can do anything and everything, and then I get nothing done, right? I do this and I do that and I do over here and I come back here and go, and I never get good at anything. Because see, that's how I feel about myself. We have to hunker down sometimes and face the pain and live the pain and figure out ways to do it. And so I'm going to talk about real fast, and just is two things we need to do. And it's kind of a paradox if you think about it. We need to exercise, and we need to sit down and be mindful. Hear the paradox there? So I'm sitting here telling you, you need to get up and get moving, At the same time, you need to sit down and become a little more introspective and pray and live with gratitude. So, but let's talk about exercise just for a minute. So we've said that the way to get better is through pain. Well, exercise is such a great, safe way of doing that. Exercise, this is a quote here, exercise is immediately toxic to cells, leading to increased temperatures, noxious oxidants, and oxygen and glucose deprivation. Yet the evidence is overwhelming that exercise is health promoting, and the absence of exercise, especially combined with chronic sedentary feeding, which means in America we eat too much, eating too much all day long is deadly. So I'm in my 60s, guys. I see people in the 20s. I'm going to say this to you guys out there, 20s and 30s who are so out of shape it makes me sad. And it's killing you. Get up and get moving. You don't need, see, this is where toxic shame kills us. So in your toxic shame, you're going to, I don't know how many people said to me, you know what, I want to start exercising, but I need to lose some weight first. I'm like, maybe do it at the same time, right? Or some of you out there now have heard what I said, and now you're going to go out and you're going to exercise for 8 hours tomorrow, and then you're going to be so much pain and misery, you won't do it again. Do you see how toxic shame is so destructive? But exercise is important, people. We are not made to sit around like we are. I was listening to a doctor the other day I thought was pretty funny. He was talking about, he says, look, I don't want to be mean. He says, but go back and look at a picture of elementary children from 50 years ago and compare it to a picture of elementary children today, and what do you see different? He says the numbers of kids who are obese is so much higher today than it is back then. I remember getting this awesome book. It was color pictures during the Depression. It's so cool. These pictures look like they're taken, but they're from the 30s. There's not one fat person in that picture, not one. So I'm not fat shaming anybody, so make sure you hear me. I'm just telling you, get moving because you'll feel better. But you got to do it. You got to do it. You don't have to be big, don't have to be extravagant. It just needs to be something, right? So a key to well-being is for us to get off the couch and move our real bodies, not our virtual ones. Exercise has a more profound and sustained positive effect on mood, anxiety, cognition, energy, and sleep than any pill I can prescribe. Quote, Anna Lemke, who's a psychiatrist from Dopamine Nation. But you know what? Toxic shame keeps us from exercising because we don't think we're worthy. It's not okay for us to feel better. So people, please do something. Get moving. And it doesn't mean this, right? You know, it's like she was talking in her book, my fear is that a lot of people actually believe they're exercising through avatars on their screen. You're not. I hate to break it to you, you're not. You need to get outside, get some vitamin D, and whatever it is, get moving. So now I'm going to say that, and I'm going to tell you we need to become more mindful. We need to be more deliberate about our mindfulness. So here's another quote. Mindfulness is simply the ability to observe what our brain is doing while it's doing it without judgment. How does that sound, us toxic shame people? This is trickier than it sounds. The organ we use to observe the brain is the brain itself. Weird, right? That's what mindfulness is. Just stop in the world for a moment. It doesn't have to be 4 hours. Again, toxic shame people will say, well, when I sit down, I'm very ADD and I just go all over the place, so I just judge myself and I feel worse when I'm done. Or, well, I couldn't do it for 4 hours, so I guess I better not do it at all, right? The point is, you know what? I'm ADD. I've tried to do 3 minutes and I feel pretty good about that. I know it's not what I'm supposed to be doing. I know I need to be praying to God more, all that. But you know what? If I do 3 minutes of mindfulness, is better than 0 minutes. Or try to do an hour every morning, and that lasts for about 2 days, maybe. At least with me, it's going to last 2 days in the mornings. So the brain can be pretty tough on us. Our brain can be pretty tough. You know, we can come up with some pretty weird thoughts, embarrassing thoughts. What we have to do with mindfulness, you just have to look at it without judgment. You don't have to feel guilty about what you're feeling and thinking. I always tell people, when you feel things, don't judge how you feel. That's how you feel. It's what you do with it's the problem, right? So it's a lot better to talk about our emotions than act out our emotions. So just for a moment, be an observer of you. And the thing is, this is so important for us in our abstinence, when we quit, when we give up some of the crazy things we do in secret or out in public, all those things we do, all the hiding and all the things we do to keep us from facing pain. Now we're telling you, you need to face your pain. You don't have to do it all at once. Again, toxic shame people, we're going to try to do it all at once, and we're going to fail miserably. Instead, it's a process. It's a process. It's a process. So the trick is to start running while stopping running away from painful emotions. How's that sound? We have to figure out ways to allow ourselves to tolerate the pain, which is hard to do. So here's what I would tell you is that mindfulness works eventually. Exercise works eventually. Support groups work eventually. But just think a month from now, if you really put yourself into a little bit of exercise, a little bit of mindfulness, and got yourself around supportive people, think about how much better you would be. So I think I'll close there. I want you to realize that you don't have to live with toxic shame. Maybe a little. I don't know if we ever completely get rid of it, but we certainly can diminish it. We certainly can reduce it. We certainly can have a rich, full, meaningful life at least some of the time, right? Is it fair to us to live in toxic shame all the time and not ever know what rich, full, meaningful life means? Or maybe we can, ratchet down toxic shame some of the time and maybe ratchet up rich, full, meaningful life once in a while. It can be done. Let go of those painful religious things that you've been told. God loves you. I don't know how to say it to you. Jesus loves you. We're the ones keeping score, not them. I just hope you can hear that. You're not cursed. You're not stupid. You're not inadequate. You actually are a wonderful, talented, loving human being who's been harmed. And now it's time to let the harm go, let the shame go, to live a full life. So I appreciate you joining me today. And if you ever need to talk to me, you can go to our website, which is nscmechanicsville.com. All sorts of contact information is on there. I'd love to hear from you. And appreciate all of you out there that are listening and all of you here that are listening. And I hope for all of us, I pray for all of us that we can let go of some of our toxic shame and have a life we're looking for. So we always close NorthStar with the prayer of serenity. And I always tell people, so many times I'll kid people when I talk to them when they're out there having a lot of anxiety and they're stressing and all. And I go, I think there's a prayer out there somewhere. I'm not sure what it's called, but I think it has something to do with serenity. But if we really listen to this is how you do a rich, full, meaningful life, is right here in this prayer. So let's go ahead and close with prayer of serenity. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardships as the pathway to peace. Taking, as Jesus did, the sinful world as it is, not as I would have it. Trusting that Jesus will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him in the next. Amen. Again, thanks for joining us today.